Hello, everybody. We're going to start at 1:59. How about that? My name is Niko. I'm a co-founder of Sitelink. We are augmented reality for construction company. Really excited to be here because we're going to have a really, really good panel. Unfortunately, Angelica from NASA is not able to make it today. She is in Florida, couldn't make it to Texas last night. But regardless, we have a great panel. I spent probably 5 hours talking to all of these folks over a couple of 3-4 weeks of preparation for the panel. We can really have 3 to 4 hour discussion, but we're going to turn it into a 45-minute session. We don't want to speak so much about what we have prepared. We're going to keep the session very short to our prepared material, and then we're going to open up for a Q&A. We have 5 or 6 questions already submitted on the app. We also have asked for you guys to answer the poll question. So if you go into the app, if you go into your agenda, select the session, there is a poll option. Please fill out. It's really interesting for us to see, and it also helps us navigate the discussion into what's of your interest. We want it to be evaluating. We want everybody to walk away learning from this great group of people. And with this, let's kick it off, right? So I'm gonna introduce briefly. So we have Kim, Nick, and Dane. And I'm gonna ask you guys to please introduce yourself. What company you're from, what is your role, what is your industry. And throughout this preparation for this panel, I realized that every single one of you gave me a different definition of digital twin that you use with your teams or with your leadership teams or with your customers. So maybe also give your definition of a digital twin, and we can start with you, Dane.
Yeah, sounds good. So my name is Dane Laughlin. I'm actually the Director of Advanced Learning Capabilities at INVISTA. And my team actually focuses on XR. We work on digital twins and now generative AI, which is everybody's new favorite buzzword. But digital twins to me in the work that we do mean contextualizing a lot of the data that our operators use on a daily basis into a visualization that they can actually use and understand quickly. So I don't know how many of you guys have the similar experience of, going to, have an operator or an engineer or something like that, go and look for documentation or some piece of information they need to do their job, and it takes them hours to find it, or they can't find it at all. And that's really the problem that we're trying to address by building connections between the data that we have and then making that visual so that people, more natively can understand that data.
Paint us a picture of what your typical facility would look like.
Yeah, so a typical facility for us is, I think our Victoria facility is a couple thousand acres. There's, metal pipes everywhere, lots of vessels connecting each other. And so very large facilities. And, we also, EHS is very important to us. There's a lot of hazardous chemicals that are flowing through those pipes, and so it's important for us to ensure that we're efficiently and effectively producing the products that we make.
Thank you. And how big is your team? I think it's also important for people to know.
About 10 people right now.
Great. Kim?
I'm Kim Fenrich. I work for ABB, the Process Automation Division. So ABB does everything, right? Robots, motors, drives, automation, but I'm specifically focused on process automation. So controls and automation systems to industries such as refining, power generation, pulp and paper, you name it. If there's a process to be controlled, we're probably doing it somewhere. That's the simplest way of looking at it. So I'm a product marketing manager for one of the control and automation product lines. I have a background in digital. So Niko asked the question about your version of the digital twin, or your definition of the digital twin, right? So to me and to ABB Process Automation, it's more about a data set, right? So it's the data that we gather from plant equipment, motors, pumps, conveyors or whatever we're controlling, and how we use that data to drive process optimizations. We can use it from a maintenance and the service perspective to figure out before a device fails, right? When we can predict it's going to fail and do predictive maintenance scheduling.
Great, thank you. Nick?
Yeah, great attendance we have for this one. Thanks so much for coming out, everyone. I'm Nick Turner, the Digital Twin Engineer Lead at GHD. We're a 12,000-person global AEC, architect, engineering, construction company, traditionally, almost 100 years old, and traditionally designing dams, roads, water treatment plants, all of those things. But nowadays, we have almost 1,000-person digital team focused on the digital delivery of all of these things. And I guess on the digital twin definition, well, if we look at there's an organization, the Digital Twin Consortium, and so kind of the official definition is a digital representation of a real-world asset, updated at a specified frequency, right? And it leads to what Kim and Dane are both saying. It's this data set that we're keeping going with this asset. And the reason I kind of got into it, 5-6 years ago when I saw digital twin coming along, is I realized this is really kind of just this third major transition maybe in the design world, whether we're designing planes or microchips or these assets, is that, we kind of had paper and papyrus and pencil, right, designing maybe the pyramids, and then we had the 2D CAD, and once we had 2D CAD, we were able to really change designs quick, right, and reproduce things. And then we had the 3D CAD BIM world kind of come along, and when that revolution happened, we could do clash detection, things like that, right? We could build these things 100 times before we ever do it in the real world, and all these different capabilities, right? And then with digital twin, we kind of becomes where instead of this as-built, right, all of those things we were designing, and then we check that it's built, and then it's an as-built, right? And it's filed away. And I've even called on, $500 million NFL stadiums, like, do you have the as-built? It's like, oh, I think it's in this server, maybe Bob put it there. And it goes to these guys of maintaining that as is now, right? And so digital twin becomes not this as-built, but now it's this as-is methodology of delivery is how I really see it from the beginning to the end, and managing the design process, delivery operation with this as-is methodology.
Thank you. Kim, as we were discussing, I really appreciated your pragmatic kind of approach to digital twin. And I want to ask you a question about different types of digital twins, and maybe start with, we typically see a picture on a presentation of a digital twin exactly as you have painted. Like, it's very beautiful, AR overlay with data popping in and out, colors changing, progress you see, the movement of liquids or whatnot. So, like, tell us what the reality is. Like, where are we? How far away from that picture, and to the pragmatic use cases, and what are people in the field are actually looking for? So, what are those different types of digital twins?
Yeah, sure. So, as I look at it, there's like 4 different types of digital twins, right? There's a component digital twin, which, and using a car analogy here, it would be, say, the radiator, the oil filter, right? It's just a piece. The next level would be an asset. So in the car, an asset would be potentially the internal combustion engine, right? Then there's a process twin and a system twin. Process twins we've been doing for years, right, with process simulation. But that would be the internal combustion process running the car. And then the system would be everything in the car connected to each other and how they interact, right? So process and system twins are hard. They're complex, they're complicated, especially when you have multiple vendors who need to contribute data to that, right? So the message that I always give everybody is you need to figure out when is good enough, because complexity, complication equals big time investment, and that's hard to get, right? So you need to figure out when is good enough for the problem I'm trying to solve, right? And in many cases for us, good enough is if I can get data off of a motor or a pump that tells me its health, right? How long has it been running? How's it supposed to run? What are the as-built specs? How is it running now? Am I sensing any vibrations? What's my energy consumption? Has it increased? These are all signs that allow us to predict, if you will, when we have to maintain it or when it's going to fail.
Who is the main user of digital twin in your perspective, from your perspective?
In our businesses, it's going to be the operations folks, right? So you have a control room operator maybe who's looking at this data, and he gets an alarm, and based upon the data set, it could tell him what he needs to do, right? Maybe that's run this device in manual until somebody can look at it or fix it. The other primary users are maintenance personnel. So we can take a look at pumps, valves, again. How are they performing, and when do we need to fix them?
Thank you. Nick, what are the benefits and challenges of digital twins at the scale that you guys are doing at GHD?
Well, I think, the benefits is whatever you're trying to do. You see a lot of the VR training here. We do a lot of that, a lot of the AR, or as well as, the AI. Generative is obviously what they all need is this data set, right? That's kept updated. So if you're doing VR training modules, and then the facility's changed over a couple of years, but now your module's still training on the old thing, and you'd have to totally rebuild it, right? Where if that game engine is just referencing the right data, it's just kept updated by itself, right? So just one small example, a lot of people working on, same thing with AI, right? You need all that different data brought together to be able to run the AI. So there's infinite challenges. Of course, as on any of these projects, you kind of have four things, I suppose. Data gathering, whether that's some kind of instrument or just drag and dropping Excel files and things like that. And then the standardization, right, to bring it all together. And interestingly, we have a trivia question. So if you look at the metadata, right, of everything in the world, the TV, the chandelier, us, what's the one variable it all kind of has in common? Jeff might have some good swag for it. No one? Like a location, right? XYZ. So that's kind of the only thing we can bring a lot of this stuff together, once we start to get the whole broader world. And there's all kinds of problems with that because of all the coordinate systems. But then we have the data intelligence or analytics. That might be where your AI comes in, where you're doing whatever you want to do, like the pump health or whatever analytics. And then the visualization, right, which dashboard, we only have really three ways, right? Like a dashboard, a 2D, 3D map, maybe like an Esri GIS map, and then kind of the XR, augmented reality way. So kind of just those ways to look at this data. So I think they all kind of fall into those categories somewhat on the process, and they all have challenges along the way.
Thank you. Dane, I want to go to you now and kind of tie both things together. So as Nick has said, there is this understanding of as-is conditions. There is this understanding of component and process digital twin. How does it all come together in an industrial environment for the sake of operational excellence and efficiencies? How are you guys doing it? How far along are you in the process? Where did you start? How big was your team when you started, and how big it is now?
Yeah, okay, so I would say I'll start with where we started. And a lot of times people think about digital twins as being the 3D model or 3D asset, to take a look at, and that's kind of what people consider to be, a digital twin. And I think the data piece is a really important aspect of it, and it's probably the hardest part to maintain, to actually put together, over time. And so where we actually started was at the 3D space. So we started with scanning, with Matterport, cameras. We wanted to make 3D representations of our areas available to everybody, and with the assumption that, we have subject matter experts that are remote. If we can put them in a digital space and allow them to add notes, to tag different items, all of those things, this would be really valuable for us. So that's kind of where we started. What we realized, though, is that when you use a system like Matterport, which is great visually, but from a data perspective, it needs additional kind of help or additional API access, all that stuff. We realized that the real value is how do we build context over time and then maintain that, to these guys' point. And so we kind of went down this path of using graph databases, which many of you might be familiar with, but the intention is to build relationships between different silos of data and to be able to kind of interweave that data together. So again, we realize that a procedure by itself isn't as valuable as a procedure with OSI Pi data in it. Or OSI Pi is much more valuable when we can tie it into various assets that we have, like in SAP, or we can know inventory counts, all these different things. It's important that we have this ecosystem of data that works together. And so that's really the trick that we're kind of in the process of working through, as well as P&IDs is another big piece of this. How do we start at the lowest level? Things that we are required to keep up to date due to compliance. Start there, because we know that the data is generally going to be more up to date or maintained more efficiently and effectively than in other places. So start at that base level and then build your data set off the top of that. And then kind of a data orchestrated layer of relationships between all the different systems is really what we're hoping for and pushing towards. We started with 2 people. We're now at 10 folks in the business, or in the team. And really, a subset of the team is really focused on digital twin. But what we found is that if you are very pragmatic about the way that you approach these things, you can start with kind of high value, low barrier to entry use cases and kind of get that foundation in place. And then all the fancy visualizations and all the other things that we talked about can come later. But as long as you have that data layer and you're able to orchestrate it in a 3D space, it's a really good foundation to build from in the future.
So I come from a startup world for the last 7 years before I was part of the large organization. But what I found interesting talking to you is that despite the fact that you guys are a large company and you're part of even larger company, you run your business unit or your team. You're constantly pitching to your business on how, why this digital twin is important and so on and so forth. And, you go to the field and then you pitch to the users why that it's important. I'm looking at the polls right now. A lot of the folks in the audience, by the way, thank you very much. We have 100+ people. So a lot of folks in the audience are implementing or in the process of implementing digital twin and are on digital twin implementation teams. So maybe walk through, how do these pitch conversations with your business leaders go? Where did you find this clear path to understanding why it's important? Because also when Kim and I spoke, and I think Nick will echo as well, owner orchestrated digital twins go faster and more efficiently. And then maybe let's start there. Like, how do you orchestrate it within your organization? How do you talk about it? Who do you talk about it? How do you build this powerful coalition? And then we'll build on that.
Yeah, so for us, it was important to start with the why of why we're actually doing this in the first place. And one of the first problems that we were trying to address was, if you look across the industry, I'm sure a lot of you guys are experiencing the same thing. There's high turnover rates. There's folks that are retiring. We're losing knowledge in the workforce. And effectively what that experience is an understanding of how everything is contextualized, in the space around this person and the job that they've done for 30 years. And so all we're trying to do is to replicate that and say, this person knows that this name in this system is equal to this name in this system, and they know that because they've been there for 30 years, but it's not documented anywhere. And so those relationships are things that we have to get into a graph or some form of database, in our case graph, because the ground is crumbling beneath our feet in a lot of ways. The people who have been there for 30 years are leaving. Higher turnover rates means that we don't build the same institutional knowledge that we've had before. And so the message that we send when we have these conversations is we don't really have an option. We have to get this done, or we're going to lose most of the knowledge that allows us to run our sites safely and efficiently. And so I think that's a really important message to have as part of the conversation is, this isn't really an option for us, or if we want to make it an option, then we won't be able to do as good of a job in the future. So we should start today. So that was a big piece of the story. Another piece of it is we go and talk to operators, and they spend 2 hours finding a PNID, and they're frustrated. Nobody enjoys looking for something that they're trying to find for imagine every time you wanted to go get in your car, you had to look for your car keys for 2 hours. It's not a fun time. Nobody gets value out of that. And so some of these aspects of this are finding the things that are most painful for people in their day-to-day job, and then figuring out how you use the data to empower them in a new, I guess, to work in a different way.
I'll build on that, Kim, and I'll come to you now. The number one reason why people want to, based on the poll that we run, number one benefit the folks here are looking for is real-time data. How important is owner orchestrated digital twin implementation to get that data, and why?
Yeah, I was giggling a little bit to myself when Nick was talking about this, right? Because when we talk to our customers, you're right, they want that real-time data, they want that data set. But we're only a vendor, right? We only have a small piece of the equipment in these sites. So the customer says, I want data from Joe's valve and Bob's controls, and we're kind of at a loss for that, right? Because our competitors, other third-party vendors, they're not going to share their data with us, right? The only way that happens, the only way you get that data is to, as the customer, demand it, right? Maybe it's something you put in the contract. Maybe it just takes you working with the vendor to get them to understand why you need it, right? Because there's benefit to them for you to have that data so you can better operate your plan, right? You'll come back to them over and over again for their devices because there's some level of interoperability, and we're all happy. But they're not going to provide it to ABB, if you will, as a third-party competitor or vendor, because they're going to closely guard that stuff, right? They feel it's their intellectual property, or frankly, they want us locked out, and they want to put their equipment in. But it's not practical, right? It's not realistic. You're not going to replace all of your equipment with that from a single vendor.
Thank you. We're going to have one more question, then we go to the audience questions. Let's talk a little bit about the state of the technology today. Like, where are we? And this is a question for everybody, so I want everybody to answer. And we'll start with you, Nick. Like, where are we to create this digital twin of the assets that you guys are working on? What are the core technology, and how developed are those? Are there any blockers?
You'd say what actually fits into there, but to reiterate, Dane really, he talked about knowledge graphs, and I'd just say if anyone's not using knowledge graphs or familiar, your exercise tonight is to go home and ask ChatGPT for 3.5 minutes about knowledge graphs, because there's not an organization that won't benefit from them, and it's I'm even seeing SQL databases now just be replaced with knowledge graphs because it's so much more powerful. So, but yeah, I'd say the technology, it's kind of, as people have alluded, it's all there, right? It's all available, but a lot of it's real spread out. So a lot of kind of doing API type of stuff to bring it all together. But I don't think it's so much a lack of technology anymore, I mean, there's always the challenges. People talked about edge computing and things earlier to make it all actually work. But I think it's becoming less and less manual, right? And so we have things where, groups want to create this great solution, you know, that takes a lot of investment, but then a year later, it's just kind of a stock thing. So it's a little tricky on that way. And I think the limitation really is kind of a cultural thing, like most things, right? Of just like knowledge graphs. I've been for a year at my company saying, we have to be using these just for what people do, what projects they've worked on, what expertise they have. You know, I'm going through Teams trying to find people in a 12,000 person company, and you just can't, right? But a knowledge graph, it's just you put that type of stuff in, and boom, there's exactly the person you need to help. They've worked with that client before. They had this role, and it's but that organizational change, and you know, from any position other than the very top is just so difficult. And so I don't even have advice. If you have advice, I'd like to hear it on how to do that.
So, but let's go back to the technology stack itself. You don't see any deficiency. So if one decides, and is obviously, I think it's also more of a process change and a mindset shift and organizational change and change management. But from a technology standpoint, you don't ever run into a project where, like, well, we can't implement it because this particular piece of technology is not available on the market, period.
It becomes more coding a lot of the time, right? So it just becomes where it's, now we're doing a whole lot more coding to make that solution than would be necessary. I mean, and I don't know, it's always, when we get into that, right, then you sort of own that solution. Someone talked about it earlier, you know, anything you build, you own, and it kind of goes back to just the old school engineering of anything, right? What's the cleanest solution to solve that pain point, and not about any technology, just the cleanest, simplest solution.
Kim, from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, the technology, as Nick said, it's there. It's more a question of interoperability and cooperation, right? I mean, the edge computing, edge devices are a wonderful thing. But if I can't get all the data I need to that edge because somebody uses a proprietary protocol versus a standard, then in that case, the technology would be a barrier, right? But we can get the data. It's just a matter of cooperation between the equipment vendors, the device vendors, to make it so it's all available to us.
Thank you. Dane, I love when we talked about, if you don't have Wi-Fi in your facility, maybe don't focus on digital twin yet. Install Wi-Fi. So, like, from your perspective, where were you guys? What's important for you? And as you look back at all the digital twins you guys implemented as a team, what are the, these components of the tech stack, and how ready are they for your operations?
Yeah, I think a lot of times we think about or talk about digital twin as if it's a thing, and I think it's more of a strategy. And so I think that's an important piece to call out is, like, you never really arrive. It's always, you're running the race. And so, we talked through with some of the, I've talked with folks where they're like, well, we don't use tablets out in the field because we don't have Wi-Fi. And it's like, well, that's a higher value thing to focus on probably to start with, and then, the digital twin is kind of what evolves out of a lot of the base level technologies that get implemented. And so when I say digital twin's a strategy, not a solution, what I'm saying is that, it's a accumulation of all the kind of foundational technologies that get implemented, and then you roll that up into analytics and contextualization that matter, for people. And so, in our journey, again, we started at how do we just get people to see 3D things? And we've since moved into how do you take that data that we're pulling in from all these different systems and then overlay that in a way that it matters to people. But I think, we talked about the technology. I think the technology is there. I think it's the kind of institutional focus on it that's really difficult to maintain over time. And then also making sure that as you're building out the data hierarchy and you're building the relationships, that information is maintainable and those relationships are maintainable over time, because if not, then you can build a really great digital twin for a year and then it atrophies and you have to go back and redo that. And so I think it's more about institutional focus on maintenance, the actual strategy for rolling out the connections that are being made, What's your strategy for 3D if that's something that you want to include, because that's another whole other thing around maintaining both CAD models as well as LiDAR and other things. So you think about a maintenance strategy across all of these different verticals as opposed to just like kind of piecemealing it together.
Thank you. We're going to go into Q&A. I'm going to start. We have 5 questions. I'm going to start. We only have 4 microphones, so I'm going to actually go into the audience for those who want to raise your hand. And we're going to start with 1 question, and it's going to be to any one panel member. There is this idea of smart, interoperable digital twins that can interact with each other. Where do you see the place of AI technologies with digital twins, and what are the technical challenges to ensure the interoperability exists between digital twins? Any one of you guys. And if you have a question, please raise your hand.
Yeah, I'll give it my best shot.
You live with it.
Yeah, yeah. So from an AI perspective, that's what I honed in on. Apologies if I'm taking this way off course, but from an AI perspective, I think what it allows us to do is it allows us to build those relationships and maintain them more effectively, and then also extrapolate from the data more than maybe in the past. So an example of this would be, in the past, in my digital twin, I might walk up to a piece of equipment, click on it, and then I have to go through all the documentation in order to find the thing that I'm looking for. So from an AI perspective, what that could look like now is I walk up, I click on a piece of equipment, I ask it a question about what I'm looking for, it queries all the data and then returns me a response.
I think also build on the fact that you may have a couple of digital twins. How do they work with one another?
Okay, yeah, so I think it's in the foundational, like the data layer. So when you're talking about digital twins interoperating with each other, you have to have a similar context between the digital twins in order for any of the relationships or data to make sense. And so I think it's data structure and the data strategy that allows for things to interoperate, because otherwise you end up with a bunch of islands, of data or of information that can't kind of interoperate together.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Garbage in, garbage out. I'm sure you've heard this before, right?
Yeah.
In the spirit of recognizing garbage, I ask anybody on the panel, do you have any data confidence issues with the data going into your twins? And if so, how do you mitigate it, person?
Yeah, that's a great question. From my perspective, if I'm getting data from the ABB perspective, if we're getting data from our equipment, we have complete confidence in it, right? I mean, where it gets a little muddy, well, more than a little muddy, right, is when we're looking to get data from somebody else's equipment. So there's numerous standards out there. If you're familiar with them, right, there's Foundation Field Bus standards, there's OPC standards, but it's really all about which part of the standard that other company is going to implement. Because you can be standard compliant and not follow the complete data model, right? So yeah, it gets muddy when I'm trying to get data from others. There are some that I know how they've implemented their models and we can claim confidence. But then there's others that, no, you may have to do some level of data interpretation and mapping, if you will, right, to get it to the point where you need it to be. It's unfortunate, right, but that's the way it's been, right? I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and 15 years ago, everybody wanted proprietary, right? I want proprietary network. I want everything to be proprietary to you. Well, now, right, now it's shifting, but we're going to struggle to catch up. And frankly, some third parties and some other vendors may not want to catch up.
Well, it could be something that within your niche or industry you can work on. I sit on a couple of the Swan Global Water digital twin committees, and we're kind of coming up with the sort of data standardization things for the industry, that would kind of help that, right? Because each industry, whether airline or whatnot, it's kind of ends up being similar when you really break it down.
I'm going to build on, there are two more questions that address the same topic. One is, what's the bare minimum state to be considered a digital twin? And can there be too much information? And the second one, what is the balance around the level of detail?
And so it feels like those are kind of similar questions, right? Which is, can we overload people with data and to a point where it's not valuable? And our goal is to have knowledge. You can have a lot of information and no data, right? And so our intention is, again, contextualize the things that are actually important to the person at the time that they need it. So, for instance, you don't want to show all the alarms possible. You want to show the alarm that's important for what they're looking at. And so it's that kind of alarm rationalization and data rationalization piece that's really important there, because you can overload people. If you're looking at a dashboard full of information and you're supposed to pick one thing out of 1,000, the likelihood that anybody's going to be effective in that scenario is not very high. And so our goal is, provide the data that's needed, and then optimize that in a way that allows people to be most effective in the way that they use that information.
Thank you. We have a question from Anthony.
Anthony Harkey, Turner Construction. We've come across a gamut with different owners, clients out there looking for digital twin. It's almost the modern day version of ask and do BIM. How much engagement do your project procurement teams have with your facility management teams? Because on new builds, we're producing models, we're producing documents, submittals, equipment information. We have all that at our fingertips, but we don't get asked for that data until the end of the project, and we spend a whole bunch of time and money going back and capturing it. So is there a recommendation you can give to clients about when to have those conversations, who should be those conversations, so we can make sure we're giving you the information at the right amount of information and at the right time?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Because it's, you see RFPs, right? 6, 8, 10 years ago, BIM, and put BIM, and the client had no idea what it was, and now it's the same exact thing with digital twin. But I think the recommendation would be to actually get them to really think about what their need is, right? What is the actual pain point of their need, and because they're just, the cities being the clients, they're just not really prepared or technically advanced usually enough for that stuff. So you can kind of, just like a BIM model, what LOD do you really need this for whatever you're doing at the city? But then if it's something like a water treatment plant, then really working with the operators, and maybe your scope even increases, right? Because you're like, wait, you asked for it, and now this is really what the plant operators need. So we need, this much more budget to do that, and I think it can really grow the scope of all the projects as well. From your perspective, you can get them to really understand the value and what they need.
We also have a question here. It says, how are your rollout teams transitioning ownership of the data and relationship to the business? Any one of you?
Yeah, I can take that. So if you think about the general life cycle, of like an asset that we're building, a unit, an area, and it goes through the engineering process, it gets built, you have the CAD model, and then it goes into operations, and operations actually runs the facility. That's generally who needs access to all the information. But generally, those are actually split. It's different teams that are constructing versus operating the business, and they need different things. And so there's an interesting handoff that happens when you go from the engineering process into ops. And I think for us, it was more, we need to talk through what is the relationship that we need to have, how do we build data across both teams so that when it gets handed from engineering to operations, it's actually valuable to the operations team and you're not rebuilding it a second time. So I think I would say there's no magic. I think it's, building relationships between the people who lead, both of those teams and helping them understand the value to each other, and then also, understand the timeline that it could take or shorten, by executing that more efficiently.
Thank you.
Stan Galansky with CBT, Systems Integrator. I'm just curious, how many of the sensors or data collectors in your customers are wireless versus wired in today's model?
I can take that. So we're seeing a move to wireless, but I will tell you it's much slower than we would like, right? I mean, there's a huge level of investment that goes into moving from wireless to wired. Most of the facilities that have been around, well, anything that's been around that I would consider brownfield, or any facility that's been around for more than 10 years, it's all wired, right? So what we encourage them to do, if they have a planned expansion, if they're adding devices, get prepared for wireless. But wireless is tricky in many environments, right? I mean, if I'm inside a power plant on the side of a turbine or a boiler, I'm not going to get much signal strength or distance out of that anyway. So the infrastructure is expensive. I guess the short answer is not nearly enough. All right, if you wanted a percentage, I'd say maybe 10%. The progressive folks are doing it. I know many customers who have taken the leap and are doing it slowly to get there, but it's going to be a while.
Thank you. I love the discussion. We have 2 more questions. Go ahead.
Thank you. Rodrigo Vargas, Subsea 7. Just curious, if you could go back to the start of your organization's journey into digital twins, what are some things that you would tell yourselves to make it a bit more efficient journey?
I'd say almost similar to the other guy's question on how he talked about when the 3D design and BIM came along, whether you're, a chip maker, airplane designer, the firms that really went all in on that right away and said, okay, we're going to develop standards, we're going to label all of these parts the same way in our organization and share all those shapes with everybody, they really thrived, right? And so now I think as digital twin comes along, I think really getting that going on, that organizational buy-in, that it's just part of culture, is what I think would make the most difference.
Yeah, I was going to say that definitely the data structure piece of this. I mean, we tried to use traditional database structures to make this happen, and we beat our head on that wall for about a year, and then decided that we needed to make a change and pivoted. So would definitely recommend, we talked about, graph databases, and I won't talk about it anymore after this, but that was a really important inflection for us in the digital twin, journey. The other aspect of this, I think, is, for us, we started with, again, the whole Matterport implementation, and our digital twin is just taking the same scans that people are already familiar with and adding additional information to it. And so I like that approach, because you're taking a tool that people are already familiar with, they're already been using them, they find value in it, and then you're just adding additional information to that. And so that was a big win for us as well, I think, from an adoption perspective, because you're not taking a tool that people already like away from them, you're just adding to it. And so that's something I would have focused more around early on than trying to, you don't want to create more tools. People don't want more tools, they want better tools than what they already have.
And let's build on that, and that would be our final question. We spoke about, Dane, you said this is a strategy. Nick, you said it's not about technology, it's about process and change and people. So maybe each of you, in 1 minute, what is the most important factor of making the digital twin not only roll out and roll out as technology, but embraced within the organization when it comes to culture and leadership? Go.
We've hit on a lot of it already, I think, as far as really having it adopted as part of the culture. You know, I mean, you really know the things that your company stands for, right? Whether it has safety, you know, and you have these safety meetings before every meeting, or diversity, inclusion, those kind of things, you know, where you ask the average employee, they know about it, you know. And I think the organizations that can really take these type of initiatives, like Dane's group's done, and really make that part of it. So everybody in the organization, like you said, from the most low down person, hey, this is how this is going to affect you, and then the training to get them there, you know, I think is really critical that people overlook. You get these big tools, and hey, here's this great tool, and go learn how to do it, but not hold their hand, and kind of this whole learning management system to really walk them through and make sure they're comfortable with the change kind of at all those levels.
Thank you. Kim?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my case, I think this is a issue of think big, start small, but know the problem you're trying to solve, right? So go in knowing where you want to end up in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but start with something that you can accomplish, right? Be practical, solve the right problem, and show the win. Once you show the value, you can grow from there. But if you try to start big, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Dane?
Yeah, I mean, I would just reiterate it's not a tool, it's a strategy, sentiment. I think that's really important, because a lot of times we talk about digital twins again as if, at some point we'll have a digital twin that we deploy and give to everybody. And I think if you think about it in the context of, it has to be a thing that gets deployed, then it'll be forever before it's really creating value. I think if you think of it from a strategy perspective, you can create value right off the bat, because people start organizing around how do we build relationships between data, how do we clean things up, with the intention of getting to a digital twin at some point in the future. And so when you talk about it as a strategy, you can get buy-in across an organization, as opposed to talking to it about a tool, that gets delivered to them. This is a strategy that they can buy into and be a part of. So that's what I would say is probably most important for us, for our team to keep in mind.
Well, thank you. I started with, I spent 5 hours plus talking to this gentleman and Angelica, and we can go on for 5 hours more, but unfortunately our 45 minutes are up. So thank you very much for everybody who is here. Thank you to our panelists. We're available to answer questions in the halls and in the show. We're still around here. We have questions. We will come back and answer them in the app for those who we didn't answer. And thank you very much. Enjoy the show.